So welcome to our webinar with Nick from Wove. This is a lot of athletes are excited about this webinar. So I know Nick, you started Wove Saddles, which is a cycling saddle company, and you're a bike fitter, and you've worked with many of the uber cyclists in triathlon, and I think you've been pretty influential as it relates to maybe advancing how triathletes think about bike fits. And we're excited to chat with you. But would you, if you will, please give us a little bit of background on yourself and your triathlon racing career a little bit, and how you started Wove?
Yeah, definitely. And so thank you. I appreciate this, and thanks to everyone here. And also just want to give a thanks to Miguel for making this introduction. And so that was really good. So that's how I came to know this group is right before Boulder 70.3, Miguel jumped on our Wove V8 saddle, and we did a little bike fit work. And he was very satisfied and made this connection. So a little bit about my background. So I have a very varied academic background, everything from immunology, human evolutionary biology, biomechanics, mathematics, organizational behaviors, where my doctoral work is in. And so when I was doing bike fitting work is one reason why I was really heavily involved in biomechanics, also doing work in that area at Harvard in running mechanics as well. So while I personally haven't been a fitter with a studio since 2012, I launched Wove. I started working on Wove technically in 2015 when I made a one-off prototype. Just wasn't satisfied with the saddles that were out there, and I've been obsessed with bike saddles since the late 90s. For as a lot of people are, just trying to find comfort. Huge fan of ISM when it came out. When I had my own studio, I was selling, an average year-round of 25 ISM saddles a week, and then all the other brands too. Cobb and Physique and Specialized. So, but the reality is that brands like ISM and Specialized just weren't quite cutting it for me. So I made a one-off prototype, and in 2018, I decided just to go all in. I was in the middle of my doctoral work, but I decided, what the heck, I'm just going to go all in and start a saddle company. So I started prototyping, and 2019, Rudy von Berg started testing our saddles. 2020, Sam Long jumped on, and they really helped us prototype through dozens and dozens of versions. And so, yeah. And so I'll hit pause there so you can ask questions, but I will just toss out there. So at this point in time, as far as the pros that are on our saddles, we obviously have Rudy and Sam. Trevor Foley, very excited for his Ironman Lake Placid. Keep an eye out. Trevor did 30 miles per hour average for Boulder 70.3 recently. And I think he's in even better fitness going into Lake Placid. So keep an eye out for that. Magnus Ditlev, just reset his own Roth record with a sub 4-hour bike and a 2:34 run 2 weekends ago. We have Jason West, Jason Pohl, Joe Skipper, Braden Currie. I'm almost definitely forgetting some folks. I'll hit pause there, but this gives an idea. A lot of very strong cyclists on our saddles.
Yeah, they are the strongest, I would say, certainly among the strongest in triathlon, truly. So, at a certain point, maybe it's a coincidence, but once you start adding up, a bunch of uber cyclists, it's like, okay, obviously something is, you're doing something right, I would say. And in this webinar, definitely want to talk about, saddles. And I know a lot of athletes asked about, how do you select a saddle, and also bike fit. And the bike fit and saddle choice, I guess it kind of goes hand in hand. And before I keep going, if anybody has any questions, feel free to hop in as per usual. But, when we think about saddles, a lot of athletes always ask, how do I select the best saddle for me? How do I know what saddle is going to work? are there any rules of thumb that you use? I mean, how would you answer that question?
Um, I guess first I will pick up a little bit on like my own bike fitting history. I started going to bike training classes in the late 90s. And, I've been to pretty much all the major ones worldwide. And one thing I noticed was that for all of the ones I went to, and I'm not going to name them off, but they did not focus on the saddle.
Hmm.
They would just tell participants that they were demonstrating on to pick their like choose your saddle because it's such a personal choice, and you set the saddle up, and then we'll focus on the rest: the saddle height, the knee angle, the aero bar height, and fore and aft. And that always struck me because I was like, oh wait, but what about the saddle? And so in my own fit studios, what I started doing was doing blind testing. And so if I had someone come in, I would listen to their qualitative experience about what they were experiencing in terms of discomfort. I would then watch them on their bike and let their body kind of like communicate to me what's going on. A lot of that has to come down with hip rotation,
Hmm.
how much their pelvis is rotating forward versus posteriorly rotating, and if they're having soft tissue pressure, if they're having thigh rubbing. So I guess the three things we're looking at are soft tissue pressure, thigh rubbing, and how much bone sensitivity they have. Because some people have extreme bone sensitivity to where even the most cushioned saddle is hard for them. Other folks can ride pure carbon fiber and no issue, right? Where other folks have almost no soft tissue issues on any saddle. Other people, like myself, are extremely sensitive to soft tissue pressure, right? And then then there's the other group of people. If they even feel their thighs brushing the nose of a saddle, they can't do it. Other folks can ride, an ISM PN series that's 67 millimeters wide at the nose and not have any issues whatsoever. They can be rubbing holes in their shorts. And they're like, yeah, I don't care. It doesn't affect me. So those are the three factors I'm really paying attention to when helping someone choose their saddle. And what I was doing in my own fit studios is I was rotating people through blindly and would not let them look down at the saddles we're putting on. And the first round wouldn't even ask for feedback. Second round, honestly, they would just volunteer, like, oh, that's not going to work. Or, oh, that one's starting to feel really good. So we'd start removing saddles. By the fourth or fifth round through, they've chosen the saddle. They're like, that's the one I want. So that's in the fit studio. That's how we're often doing it. And again, as far as not being in a fit studio and diagnosing, it's really going to come down to those issues: thigh rub, soft tissue pressure, and nerve sensitivity on the bones.
That's really strong analysis. So you think it would be productive for athletes to go to a fitter, it sounds like. But I know I read some of what you wrote, and you talked about, the difference between sort of split nose or single nose, and there's certain advantages or disadvantages of them. It maybe has to do with thigh rub and I know Wove. What contributed to what are those factors contributed to your design of Wove saddles?
So we wanted to make a saddle that could work for the meaty part of the bell curve of the distribution. And so with a single nose saddle, you're going to have to sit off to one side of the nose. And so you have your pubis bones. And if you don't mind, real quick, I will
Yeah.
share. Let me. So can you see that?
Yes.
Are you able to see my screen? Okay, perfect.
Yep.
So in the middle here, I highlighted in red your pubis bones. Right behind that are the ischium, and you can see like right at the bottom of the curve is what we call the sit bones, the ischial tuberosity. And so when we're in a TT position, we're going to be forward on the pubis bones. There are some exceptions, and I'll show that in 1 second. But when we're rotated that far forward, if we're on a single nose saddle, we're going to have to sit off to one side. Otherwise, we're going to have like in between these two red bones here, like, can you see my mouse as well?
Yes.
Perfect. So in between these two red, the pubis bones marked in red, shaded in red, you're gonna have your soft tissue, male or female. A lot of people really focus on the gender differences, but in all actuality, the soft tissue sits in the same area between the pubis bones. Some people say, well, there's gonna be width issues. Well, there are, but there's also, those widths are also gonna be correlated to height. And because men are statistically on average taller, and women, at a shorter height have wider hips typically, right? Fact is that height typically controls for it. So we're actually seeing a lot of similarities in terms of the distance between these bones between men and women because of the height differences, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
that does make
And
sense.
so when we're rotating, then you asked about the saddle design, then we need a saddle that's going to support these bones, but we don't want the saddle to be too wide because then you get thigh rub. And we don't want the channel to be too narrow because then you get soft tissue pressure. So we want enough padding so that you can, so that you're not having the bone pressure. Now, both of these riders, you have Remco Evenepoel here on the right, and we have Rudy von Berg on the left. And what I'm demonstrating with the red line is that they're keeping their lower back in line with their hips.
Mhm.
Whereas when I jump down to this next slide, these riders are keeping their ischial tuberosity, the sit bones, in contact with the saddle, but then that puts their hips out of alignment with their lower back, and they get this kink. And a lot of people will get lower back pain. The main reason why people are doing that is because they're experiencing soft tissue pressure. So they're rotating their hips posteriorly to get off that soft tissue pressure. Now, I'll show you an exception. So I jump down here. This is Braden Currie. Now he's on our road gravel saddle that's called the Mags, but he sits really far rearward, and and there's a little bit of a kink in his back, but he's able to make that work for him. So even though our saddles work, or our triathlon TT saddle works for most individuals, the reality is that there are people that are going to be able to ride in very, very rearward on the saddle. Where if I jump back and show you Rudy von Berg again, he's as far forward on the nose as you can possibly be, right? Okay,
Right.
so I'm going to stop sharing for a second here. There we go.
So what are so sort of intuitively, you would think that if, the hips and the spine are in alignment, and so I guess, that there's that anterior tilt of the hips, you would think that that would be optimal for putting out power. And do you think that, that rotation is important for generating power? And I guess, how does it work for Braden? How can he be okay with more of a posterior tilt and he can still apply power? Does it have to do with flexibility or biomechanics?
Well, actually, I will say he does have an interior tilt,
Mm-hmm.
but the way he accomplishes that is he sits very far rearward on the saddle,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where the channel is pretty wide still. And he's one of those people that just really does not want his thigh rub, right?
Yeah.
So our mag saddle, the nose is 30.5 millimeters wide, where our V8 saddle, TT saddle, is 53.8 millimeters wide. That's still on the narrow side. Again, ISM PN series is 67 millimeters wide. So we're at 53.8. So we are, and just so you know, is the connection okay on your end?
There's some lag a little bit, but it catches up.
All right, sorry
That's
about
okay.
that.
Oh, no worries. It might even be,
Um,
it might even be on my end, but
it's hard to know. But so Braden does keep his lower back relatively in line with his hips, but he just sits very far rearward on the saddle. And when we tried the V8 saddle with him, he just went to the rear of it. And the further back on the saddle you sit, the more likely your thighs are going to hit the nose of the saddle.
Yep.
And he was just going to sit rearward. We weren't going to be able to get him up on the nose. And that's like, okay, we accept that. Like There's some folks that are there. Now, he's not in the majority of the bell curve, but a Danielle Reef is going to do the same thing, by the way. You know, like she tried her V8 saddle, but she's most recently been on our Mag saddle because she sits on the bike the same way. So yeah, so I'll hit pause there. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, so I think different strokes for different folks, and it's interesting that the TT specific saddle works for some athletes, and then the road saddle, it sounds like it works for athletes who like to be a little bit farther back, have more support for the sit bones versus, you know, sitting on the perineum. So I think this might be a good time
And you asked about,
go ahead.
well, real quick, you asked about producing power.
Mm-hmm.
So a reason why the anterior rotation works really well for producing power is because when your lower back is in alignment with your hips, you're able to engage your psoas muscles quite a bit more. That's a really big part of it. So yeah, so I think that's a big answer. And obviously the psoas muscles attached to the top of the hips. And so, I mean, you really are depending on those deep core muscles a lot for the stability and stabilizing the movement of your femurs.
Sure. And then when we think about, you know, glute versus quadricep activation, I know, you know, typically we think of, okay, if you're farther forward in the saddle, so farther up, you're going to activate your quads more versus, you know, more slack position, you know, less steep of an angle, like a road bike position, potentially activate your glutes more. And I know that that concept maybe informed your fitting philosophy, especially with athletes like, well, I guess Magnus and Trevor, et cetera. So, and then it's sort of caused you to, you know, want to use longer cranks with those athletes. So maybe talk about your philosophy as it relates to, you know, position over the pedals and,
Sure.
you know, how to generate more power and steepness of
That
that.
sounds great. And I'm going to share my screen again.
Sounds good.
And so I just pulled up a picture of Magnus. And what I'm going to focus on is this bottom section where it says, if you can read it, it says engagement, quads, and glutes.
Yep.
And it is correct that if you move more rearward, so say we have the bottom bracket here, you know, the middle of the crankset. If you move more rearward, you are going to use more of your glutes. And if you move more forward in relation to the bottom bracket, you're going to use more of your quads. But why is that? Well, if anyone here can think back to doing a squat, right? The more you keep your knees forward of your feet when you're doing your squat, you're going to use your quads more. But if you keep your glutes, your hips really far rearward of your ankles when you're doing a standing squat, you're going to use your glutes more. Well, that means that the distance from where the athlete is sitting on the saddle, roughly this point here, to where their foot is in the forward horizontal position, so the pedal in the forward horizontal position, this distance right here, this horizontal distance, is going to dictate the degree to which you're engaging your quads versus your glutes. But here's the thing is that we want to keep the hip angle open. You know, I'll jump over to a picture of Sam. You can see just how wide open his hip angle is, right? Same thing with Trevor here. Now you can open the hip angle with a lot, like with 5 different ways, or maybe four different ways. One, go to shorter cranks. Now that's what a lot of fitters do is they say, let's go to shorter cranks. But as we just discussed here, going back to Magnus, if we go to short cranks, we're going to shorten this distance from where you're sitting on the saddle to the pedal in this forward horizontal position. And if you're shortening that distance, you're going to use your quads more. So it's like, well, you know what? The glutes are a bigger muscle group, right? And if we engage bigger muscle groups, we're going to take longer to build up lactate just because they're bigger muscle groups. So we want to keep our duration, our time till fatigue longer. And we're going to keep our time till fatigue longer duration wise if we're using bigger muscle groups. So what we're doing is we are raising the front end. What does raising the front end do? It opens the hip angle. We're moving the athlete more forward. That opens the hip angle. And so with those two position changes, we've already opened the hip angle quite a bit, you know. And I'm going to take a step back and say, well, why are we so far forward? Well, because the most biomechanically efficient way to apply force to the pedal is in a perfectly straight down angle, perpendicular to the ground. The more rearward we are of the bottom bracket, the more likely we're going to apply that force at a downward sloping angle. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to apply force in a down and forward motion. When we're a little bit more forward, we're going to be able to apply that force more vertical. Now, the reality is that all the pro athletes I'm working with, they naturally go to a more forward position. And they're roughly at, if you look at this 84-degree number here, if I measure this solid red line from the bottom bracket up to where they're sitting on the saddle, they're all pretty much going to around 84, 85 degrees. So the solid red line up to here is going to be the effective seat tube angle, the angle from where their bones, their pubis bones, are in contact with the saddle down to the bottom bracket. Sam and Trevor at race effort, 84 degrees. Rudy, 85 degrees. He's a little bit more further forward,
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much across the board in a lot of ways. And the athlete just goes there. And why do they just go there? Because they're perceiving that they're able to apply their force more vertical to the ground. Okay. So as a bike fitter, I just accept that. I'm not going to fight that. I'm going to say that's where this athlete is most biomechanically efficient. Why am I going to put them really far rearward when they're just going to scoot forward during a race? And we see that a lot during bike fits. We'll have the fitter push them back. What often happens is the fitter will put them on short cranks to open their hip angle, but then the athlete says, my quads are burning. So then the fitter says, well, let's scoot you back. And the athlete says, oh, well, my quads are not burning anymore. But what you've done is you've reclosed off the hips, totally counteracting the benefit of going to shorter cranks.
Okay.
And the bigger thing is that athlete might be staying further back in the fit studio, but race day, they're going to scoot forward. Why? Because their body is perceiving that they can be more biomechanically efficient further forward. And now their fit looks like junk because they're all cramped up in the front, and it's a bad fit. So I guess going back, we accept the fact that they're going to be in this position relative to the bottom bracket. Then we open their hip angle by raising the front end. But we want to keep the glutes engaged. So the only way to keep the glutes engaged is by going to a longer crank set. But we don't have to worry about that longer crank set pinching their hips at the top because we've already opened the hip angle a lot by raising the front end 6 to 7 centimeters, sometimes more. Trevor is at 85 millimeters here. Sam is about 70. And Magnus is about 130. He's about 130 millimeters up. And the fact is that I'm just going to share a number here. These guys, all of these guys, these three guys right here, I can tell you, and Rudy, you can only see part of him here, they are either at or below 0.21 CDA. That's an insane number. Just 3 years ago, 0.23, 0.24 was a good number for a triathlete. And here's the reality is these guys are so much higher than any athletes in the past, and their numbers are so much lower. And a big part of that is, and I'll go back to Sam to demonstrate this, is look at how he has closed off the gap from his face to his hands. In the old days, and I mean, you can see Braden's doing the same thing. He's closing off that gap face to his hands. Magnus, same thing, right? In the old days, the gap between the face and the hand was a mile wide. They would put their elbows all the way slammed down in the base bar, but the head would still be almost where Magnus's is now, pretty much. I mean, it would be a little lower, but it'd be like a parachute. The wind just coming in and catching the whole body. What Magnus is doing now is he's diverting the wind away from this opening between his face and his hands. And what most of these guys are doing is they're using an aero bar with a solid underside. That's what Magnus has. That's what Braden has. That's what Trevor and Sam have. Is the underside of the aero bar is solid, so it forces the air under them, not just hitting their chest. Okay, I'll hit pause there.
Does anybody have any questions at this point?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick because I know we talked about this in the first call we had. I use really short cranks, 155, because I've had like a hip impingement, and my flexion in my left ankle is it's hard for me to get over the pedal or the top of the pedal stroke. So in a case like that, do you still recommend trying to use longer cranks and raising the front end?
So I'd have to look at where your hip angle is. And so that's the starting point, right? And so for example, let me just ask you some questions. From the base bar to where your elbows are, is it under 100 millimeters? The
From the
height
base bar to
to your
yes.
elbows?
Yeah.
Is it probably less than 100 millimeters?
Yeah, I think it's a 40. So yeah, it's about 40 to 50.
And so and as I said, like Trevor, 85, and the guy just did a 251 70.3 split with a very low CDA, insanely low CDA. And so the question is like, well, if we raised you up in the front, right? And we open your hip angle up while we're raising you up and we're opening that hip angle. So here's your femur, here's your upper body, and we're raising you up. If it comes up, well, now could we go to a longer crank set and just close it off a degree? And then would we potentially still be more open than you are now? Those are some of the questions, and it's a formula. And those are the features I'd be playing with. And then if we were to scoot you forward, that opens you up a little bit more, right? So we're gonna make those adjustments and figure out, are your glutes engaging? Are you locked in place on the bike and feeling nice and balanced? Because here's the thing: is that only a couple of years ago we were still in the theme of get comfortable being uncomfortable. But when we look at where those athletes are, let's just say Sam, Rudy, and Magnus are, I could say I could put a 70-year-old in Magnus's position and they're going to be pretty comfortable. Like in the old days that might be laughed at. That might look like a geriatric position, when you look at Magnus. But the fact is he's doing sub 4-hour bike splits consistently, right? And so it's so it's like actually. I don't think you have to be uncomfortable. You can be very comfortable, feeling very balanced. Another thing that we really focus on is we don't want these athletes having lower back pain, So we spend a lot of time making sure they are comfortable. Okay, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, thanks.
And then what do you think? Do you think that this position enables athletes to run off of the bike better?
So that's one of the big goals, right? So for example, a couple of these athletes like Sam and Trevor, after seeing Taylor Knibb get her Olympic TT slot this year, at the US National TT race, both of them were like, we're doing TT Nationals next year. And the reality is that, if it's a 40K or less time trial, with no runoff of it, we may try to see if we can get them, closer to 0.18 or 0.17 CDA. And that's going to mean getting them looking probably a little bit more like Remco Evenepoel, a little bit more tight, even a little bit lower. But for Ironman and half Ironman stuff, one of the big reasons why Magnus, Trevor, Sam, Joe Skipper, Braden Currie, all these athletes, Jason West, Jason Pohl, they are in the positions they're in, which are all in the school of thought of what I just shared about bike fit, is so they can run off the bike. What's a huge advantage to using the glutes primarily, instead of frying the quads, is, as we all know, if your quads are fried and you try to do a marathon, that's not going to go so well.
Right.
So if we keep the glutes more engaged, you're just going to have a better run. And the other big one, as I said, about eliminating and reducing the likelihood of lower back pain. As a lot of us know, when you do a 4-hour bike coming off of a Ironman swim, the swim can oftentimes aggravate your lower back, and we want to be prepared for that. In training, you may never have lower back issues, but when you're coming out of a 2.4-mile swim, your lower back might be a little fatigued and strained from the swim. And we want to make sure that the bike fit doesn't further aggravate that, because again, on the run, if your lower back is sore, that's not going to work well, right?
Right. And then when we think about, the the tilt of the extensions up, I know it looks like, is that Magnus, is that 22 degrees? So certainly, so it sounds like, I think most people are doing that for aerodynamics. Are there any other advantages to doing that? Is it more comfortable for
To
a lot
be
of athletes?
totally honest, aerodynamics is secondary.
Okay.
The reason it's secondary is because what we're really trying to do is create a bit of a kickstand effect. When you're that, so another thing with our saddles is I made our TT saddle really, really grippy. So when you sit on our saddle, like this morning, I was working with Lucy Charles Barkley, setting her up, and kind of worried about this because in the past, on her other saddles, she'd be sliding forward. Talking to Reese this morning, like that's just not going to happen. You're not going to be sliding forward on our saddle. It just holds you in place. So we want to balance position. So first off, starting with the saddle, we want to make sure you're not sliding on the saddle. And then we want the upper arm at an angle that it acts like a kickstand. If it's too vertical, the shoulders are going to want to fall over the forearm, or sorry, the upper arm. And then the angle of the forearm is going to further enhance that kind of braking force. Think about when you're biking and you're hitting all these bumps. If you're at this angle, that's going to counteract. That's going to be tangential, right, to the braking forces and momentum, right? Like the decelerations when you're hitting bump after bump after bump. If you're perfectly flat, you might start to scoot forward and have to engage some of these upper shoulder muscles. So that's the biggest emphasis. Sam is at a 35-degree angle, and yeah, so we usually, honestly, that really comes down to perception. And the fact is that if you go too steep, it starts to take a lot of muscles to hold you in place. And again, we want the athlete to come off the bike feeling fresh for the run, and we're not going to put them in a position where their upper body is having to do too much work.
Sure. So you're basically looking to optimize efficiency and potentially relaxation with that tilt, because I've heard so many different things as it relates to the aerodynamics of this, and it kind of depends on the athlete potentially, but pretty much everybody, they do say it's more comfortable.
That's right. And you got wind tunnel folks talking. Wind tunnel people will say, well, it's, Sebastian Kienle, he found the wind tunnel perfectly flat was faster. So did Ferdino, right? They were perfectly flat. Now, the reality is they were not using aero bars where the underside is solid.
Yeah. Interesting.
So that's important. And there's other things about their fit that I would like, Ferdino was not that high in the front. So it's like, there's a lot of factors there. I could pull up a picture of Alistair Brownlee, and my God, I would never put any of my athletes in Alistair Brownlee's position, because it's just asking for issues on the run, lower back, hamstring, glute strain, neck issues. It might be fast in the wind tunnel, but what you haven't heard me emphasize is I am not a wind tunnel first type of person. I am a efficiency, power first, and then we start optimizing the CDA around those variables. And we work with an aerodynamicist who works with a pro tour team, and he's very respectful of not coming in and strong arming us to change. So not coming in strong arming us to change the bike fit itself. We want to optimize comfort and power first, and then we're going to start making tweaks. But as I said, if you're getting numbers as low as 0.2000 CDA, we're obviously not doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, at that point, I don't know how much more efficient you can get. Well, it sounds like maybe 0.02 you're talking about if they were going to
Well, I would estimate Remco Evenepoel might even be under 0.17. And that might be the fastest TT guy, period, ever. I mean, and look at his results, right? World TT champion. So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is
he's also like 5 foot. He's
that
teeny.
helps.
Yeah.
That helps a lot.
Whereas the guys I'm working with are all over 6 foot.
Right.
You know,
Incredibly
and
low
all
CDAs.
over 170 pounds.
Yeah, I mean, and then when we think about the classic fits, I guess I would call maybe Jan Frodeno is a classic fit. Sebastian Kienle, classic fit. Sounds like Alistair Brownlee. I can't picture his fit right now, but more classic. And, you know, it seems like the run is becoming way more important in triathlon now. And we think about Alistair, I mean, not to armchair quarterback it, but, you know, I don't think he's run as well off of the bike in long course races as he has in Olympic racing. So I don't know. I mean, potentially if he fits.
I don't know how much of the
Flip-flop
bike
we're talking
plays
about.
into that, but I would say if I had an athlete like that, the bike fit's the first place I would go.
Yeah, interesting.
It's kind of low hanging fruit.
Question. He should come out and visit you, maybe.
As I said, I don't even have a fit studio. I do most of my help. I mean, like if guys are here in Boulder, we'll meet up, but most of the time we're just doing videos over WhatsApp. So.
Interesting. Nice. One question I had, what hip angle do you strive for? Like that if you measure it like from the collarbone to the hip to I guess the knee at, I guess, 12 o'clock. What do you think? Like over 40
And
degrees?
you know what? I'm not going to quote a number there. So there are certain numbers that I aim for, you know, and I've listed some of those. That hip angle number is tricky. I find it really, really tricky. I like, for example, arm angle, how far the arm is raked out. That's pretty standard across people. Knee angle, pretty standard. Effective seat tube angle, pretty standard. But the hip angle, femur length, torso length really start to get tricky in there. So I've moved away from being a little bit more prescriptive in that. But that's the only angle that I move away from. I'm just saying it just varies so widely with different femur and torso lengths.
Sure. That makes sense. Does anybody have any other questions before we want to keep going a little bit? Anybody have any questions or thoughts?
I wanted to ask a question. I'm a little bit more of a track rider than a triathlete, specifically kind of thinking about the mass start position and how it's kind of, I think you're seeing a lot of people kind of move into these more forward kind of positions like you're talking about. Is there any kind of other fit considerations for track riding that differ from the triathlon position? I know there might be maybe a limitation in crank length, and then in a mass start event, you know, there's a little bit more support now with the hood's position, but maybe still a little bit less support on the front end to kind of combat that falling forward feeling, as well as that, like, you know, coming through the banking with all the force coming through the banking.
You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen in 1 second, but I need to pull up what I'm going to show you. So give me 1 second here and I'll do that. Okay.
Thank you.
And with that, do you know who Grant Kuntz is?
Yeah.
So Grant is on our saddle right now. And we were just at the track with him recently. And actually on Instagram, we'll be posting a video with him today. But yeah, so check us out at Wove Bike on Instagram. And let me show you. Here we go. Let me know when you can see it.
Got it.
Okay, so here's Grant at the front. This is Van Shep right behind him. And so you can see what they're doing is they're really raising their front ends, a whole lot like all we've been talking about today, right? um, and they're using long stems. I know Van Schip has a 180 millimeter stem, and Grant Kuntz has something similar. He's yep. So by raising the front end, they're closing off the gap, especially Van Schip. You can see the distance between his hands and his face, and what that does is it helps balance his position as well. You know, being a little bit higher in the front, it's more aerodynamic, tested in the wind tunnel, and on the track using aero sensor, and he just gets a more balanced position. And here's another picture. Here he is, a close up showing his 180 millimeter stem. This is on the road. You know, he does road and track, and so you can see some pictures here, and here's some other athletes doing the same sort of thing, you know, raising, like really closing off this distance. But what they're having to do is get the rear really far rearward, you know, and that's a little bit suboptimal. What Van Schip did was just go ahead and just raise the front end so he can leave. Give me a second here. I need to get, there we go. He's raising the front end so he can leave his hip angle, or leave his contact point with the saddle where it needs to be. He doesn't have to shift his hips rearward or anything. So he can just stay locked in place. And Grant's doing the same thing. And I can say that if Grant had a bike or whatever that allowed him to come up even higher, he would probably come up even higher. You know, there's just bike limitations. Where Van Schip, you know, it's hard to see, but he put about 90 millimeters of spacers under his stem, and his stem is still at an upward, I believe, negative or a positive 15-degree angle. So he's really bringing it up. So I'll hit pause there and I'll stop sharing. And I'm curious if that answers the questions a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
What else? Does anybody else have any questions?
And, you know, we've been talking online over at Slow Twitch a whole lot about applying these positions to the road position as well. Kind of like what Van Schip was doing right there, you know. We've been talking a lot about that, analyzing Pogacar's position and all these other riders. And give me a minute and I will share one more image with you.
Great.
We're probably going to put an article up on Escape Collective soon. And what we're looking at is progressive road bike positions. And there was a article already on Escape Collective. They did, Ronan did a review of my saddle, the road saddle, and then we did a podcast talking about progressive road bike positions and bike, and a lot of the same topics we've already talked about here, but a little bit more focused on road. So let me go ahead and share, and let me know when you can see that.
We can see it.
So what I have measured here with these angles is the effective seat tube angle. So this is where I'm estimating the pubis bone to be in contact with the saddle. Here's the bottom bracket. And then what we're looking at with this front red line, this is the steer tube angle. This is going to largely dictate the handling of the bike. And what we're looking at is how much of their mass is ahead of that red line. We can look at the center of the shoulder, you know, like Pogacar here is about probably 5 centimeters ahead of that red line. I can go over here. I can't pronounce his name, but I know his name, this Kenyan rider. And this, he's square on, like the red line straight through the center of his shoulder, but he's also at a 70-degree effective seat tube angle, which is really slack. Jorgensen, a 76-degree effective seat tube angle, which is what I ride on the road, for example, but you can see how his shoulder is ahead a little bit. We can look at Geraint, we can look at Yates, Vanderpool, you know, I just keep going down the line here. And you see the degree to which they're in front. Yates insanely ahead of the steer tube angle. So the argument to make is, and we've heard a lot of pro riders, including you know, Lachlan Morton and a whole bunch of folks that kind of under the radar behind the scenes because they don't want to speak out too loud because they're on the world tour and they have bike sponsors, but they want to see the front center of their bike extended. The front center measures from the front hub to the bottom bracket, this horizontal distance. They want to see it lengthen out a little bit because then that puts this red line a little bit further forward, and the handling of the bike is going to be a little bit better, you know? So this is part of the conversation that I've been having with Dan Infield of Slow Twitch, and also Ronan and I will probably put out an article where we talk about this, and we'll also talk about crank length. So for example, Bagacha is on 165 millimeter cranks. Now, what I would argue is if he's at an 80 degree effective C-tube angle, his hip angle is wide open. Does he really need to make it more open with a 165 crank? In the off season, what I encourage his team to do is to do lactate testing and to see with different crank lengths from 155 up to 175, how quickly is he building up lactate at these different crank lengths? And what I'm proposing is that, you know, maybe at 172.5, he'll take longer to get to, you know, 4.0 millimoles of lactate per liter of blood than he would at 165, where he currently is. Whereas 175 just might be really biomechanically uncomfortable. You know, Derek, going back to your issue, he might experience, so that there's a balance there. Someone like Sam Long this winter, we might play with 177.5 cranks, to be honest. He's loving his 175s. And I'll toss these numbers out there. Rudy von Berg, 175. Sam Long, 175. Trevor Foley is just a little bit over 6 foot, 172.5. Magnus is at 172.5. And none of these guys are on really short cranks. Now, Joe Skipper has tried shorter cranks this season, but he has the Watt Shop crank set that allows him to change the crank length on the fly pretty easily. And after some races where his quads are really getting him on the run so far this year, he's going to go ahead and give some longer cranks, crank length a try here to test this, to see how it affects his run.
Interesting stuff. Is there a muscle type difference in glutes to quads? I know size is different, but are there more type 2 muscles and muscle fiber types in glutes things?
You would probably be able to answer that question better than me. My knowledge is the type of training you do and the genetics plus type of training you do is going to change that distribution quite a bit, right?
Yep.
I don't know. Like, here's the question I'd maybe bounce back to you is, because they have shown that type 1 versus type 2 muscle fibers can drastically change. Like, I can take endurance guy, right, but put him on the track, start doing sprints, and within 6 months we start seeing a whole lot more type 2 muscle fibers in their quads. And the question is, well, are we going to be able to change that distribution as well? And I don't know the answer to that, and I actually don't know if that research has been done, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. Interesting to think about for sure. It'd also be interesting in doing like electromyography, like measuring the electrical impulses and the activating the glutes versus the quads in different positions, but could be interesting. But the lactate testing that you're talking about gets right at it. I think that's so much easier.
And there's a question of using SMO2. You know,
Yep,
SMO2 correlates pretty strongly with lactate. Now the question is it exact enough? And I hear that it's not. But what would my dream would be is you could put an SMO2 sensor on their quad and then another one on their glutes, right?
Yeah.
And measure the differential. That would be ideal. What I'm told by people that have done the test, they're like, yeah, Nick, it doesn't quite differentiate that well. But I think they're using the same computer for both sensors. And I would say have one computer for glutes with the stick-on pads and one for quads and another, you know, the computer head for that one. I don't know. There's a lot of research we could do. I mean, I can go on and on with it. And something else I'll say that I focus on with the athletes I work on is we really focus on biomechanical efficiency. That means applying force between the 1 o'clock and the 4 o'clock position in the power stroke. Applying force from 4, the backside, over to 1 is not biomechanically efficient. The reason why is because of a concept called interlimb coordination. Your brain only can allow neuromuscular focus on one primary muscle group at a time on different sides of your body. So if I try pulling up with my hamstring on my left side, I'm going to reduce the amount of glutes and quads that are firing on my right side tremendously. So I'm better off relaxing on the back side of the stroke and focusing on the front side. Now that doesn't mean accelerating 1 to 4, because then it looks really choppy, right? You want it so that an outside observer goes, oh wow, look, Nick is pedaling in perfect circles, but I'm really only applying force 1 to 4, and then keeping my hip flexor and everything really relaxed over the dead spot, the top of the stroke. And this is where a lot of athletes get hip impingement, is they pull up over the top of the pedal stroke. So they are, through their biomechanics, causing hip impingement versus the crank length or hip angle.
That's interesting. And so you think that, I mean, the results speak for themselves, but when we think about the dead spot, you would think that like shorter cranks, less of a dead spot, longer cranks, you think you'd be able to generate more torque because of the length of the lever, I guess. But you think that distance, like from an efficiency perspective, maybe a metabolic efficiency, although that might not be a good example because the muscle group difference. But do you think that mechanically, if from a perspective of mechanical efficiency, longer cranks, you're not giving anything out necessarily by going to longer cranks? We think about like dead spots.
Yeah. So again, that comes back to hip angle, right?
Yeah.
So if our hip angle is kind of crunched at the 12 o'clock position, it's going to create more of a dead spot. It's going to be more difficult, to get up and over. But if I have your hip angle already really far open, you're not going to notice that. You're going to hit it. I mean, if I put Sam on 190 cranks tomorrow, he's going to struggle.
Yeah.
Like you're going to hit a point, like there's a bell curve there, right?
Yeah.
Now, as far as the additional torque you can get, now if you're a sprinter, yeah, I want to see you on longer cranks because of those sudden bursts in acceleration, you're going to benefit from the longer cranks, right? The counter argument to that is that you just need to have your gain ratio appropriate, and Ronan talks about that too. Gain ratio is a concept that Sheldon Brown came up with. It takes in your gear inches, but it factors in both your crank length and your tire size, because your crank length and your tire size do affect your gearing ratio. And so when you go to shorter cranks, your gearing ratio actually gets harder. So when I look at research on crank length and they're like, wow, look, this changed the person's cadence. I'm like, but you didn't change the cog sizes or the front chainring size. And the fact is that when you go to a shorter crank, the gearing ratio gets harder. So you need to keep the gain ratio constant. And so as Ronan talked about in that podcast I did with him, is that if people go to shorter cranks for longer cranks, like, oh man, it feels harder or easier. And Ronan's like, well, just shift.
Right.
I mean, it's that simple. Just shift. And if you're topped out or bottomed out, then you need to change your gearing ratio all around, right? You need to go in and do the math on that. We did that with Trevor going into Boulder 70.3. He's on 172.5 cranks, and there's some downhills there where we want to make sure that he can fly, so he can still pedal. So we put a 60-tooth front chainring on. Now, to be honest, we did not anticipate it being so windless that day, because there's always a little bit of turbulence in the air. It was dead still. And so this is the reason why he held 30 miles per hour average. And with that, he actually needed a 63 tooth in the front. And with that, if he would have had a 63 tooth, we're confident he would have done a 149 70.3 bike split. But anyways, but just looking at how gearing ratio and stuff, you have to focus on the gain ratio. Online, there's calculators. And if you're messing with crank length, you have to look at your gain ratios, because otherwise you're going to be in a world of hurt. You go to a longer crank length, you're going to be spinning out on downhills, and it's going to be annoying.
Yeah.
If you go to a shorter crank length and you go up to do a climb, you're going to struggle because you don't have an easy enough gear. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. All that makes sense. What other questions do people have? Anybody have any questions or thoughts?
We can give a minute here so people have time to chime in. The psychology of asking questions.
Yeah. Hey, Conrad, I've got one. Saddle tilt angle. The philosophies that you may have around saddle tilt angle in particular, in relation to hip angle, and then the concept of the saddle being too far tilted downwards and thus then creating like IT band issues.
Yep. Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen briefly real quick, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me know when you can see that.
We could see it.
Okay, so this is a recent Instagram post we posted. So, you know, when we went through all those iterations of our saddle, for a while there, I really did want a saddle angle that was perfectly level, okay? And one way I wanted to try to achieve that is create a saddle where the shell cupped your pelvic bones, okay? And just as a reminder, I'm gonna do something real quick. And so I'll go back and show this. So yeah, we wanted the saddle to kind of cup this area, especially right here where it changes color from red to bone color. We wanted it to be nice and cupped right there. But honestly, what we found was that it was just creating too much. It was creating too much pressure, you know? So what we decided to do then is, so I'll go back to this, is what we decided to do was create a saddle where there was a negative tilt built into the saddle. So you can see that when the rails are flat on the ground here, there's a negative 2-degree angle on the nose. And what else is going on is you can't see here, the foam gets progressively deeper as it gets towards the nose here. So what that's inherently doing is that when the rider is sitting right here on the nose, the foam is creating this shape that we're aiming for with the carbon. We decided to let the foam do that work. So now the foam holds you in place. And when you put your weight on it, it creates that V shape. That's where the V comes from in our V8 saddle name. The 8 comes from, because we curved it in right here to create more thigh clearance. So it has kind of a figure 8 shape to it. We decided we didn't need that, and we went for this. We kept it pretty linear here, you know. But anyway, so all that aside, what we found with all the testing we did, it would be better off to have that rider start at a negative 3-degree angle. Why? Because as you anteriorly rotate forward, we want the saddle to move with you. Now, Joe Skipper and Magnus Ditlev are at around -7, -6 degrees. But they have a huge amount of anterior hip rotation, you know? Sam Long's -5, Rudy von Berg, -2.5, Trevor Foley, -5, myself, -5. So we're all a little different. And it's really going to come down to our anterior hip rotation, with this being my hips, you know? But then what we had to do is make the saddle really grippy to hold you in place. And I'll admit, when I have the saddle at -5, it feels, my body tells me I'm on a flat saddle. It doesn't feel tilted. And I am not sliding forward because my saddle is so grippy. If I were to tilt anyone else's saddle at that angle, I'm going to slide forward. The exception might be the new Physique 3D printed. That's a pretty grippy saddle. Those 3D printed saddles are really grippy. You're not going to slide forward. So yeah, but I'll hit pause there. Do you want to follow up? Is there any part of that I didn't answer?
Well, no, you answered most of that. I think with the Wove saddle, you're seeing 5 degrees is probably your -5 degrees is probably your average there.
That's right. Yeah, and -5s. You know, for a lot of amateurs and stuff in there, it might be a little less than that. You know, like I will admit, the people I just named, like Sam and Trevor and myself, really anteriorly rotated. You know, but I can give an example right now. Jason Pohl, he was really wanting. He's a pro from Canada. He just last year he did a 4-hour bike and a 2:39 run at both Roth and Ironman Maryland. So he, you know, those are good splits. He'll be at Placid, but he was at -3 for a long time. And what was interesting is we had to change his front end up. So this is an important component because everything's a system here, right? So Jason Pohl was, he was on 51 speed jump cups and bars, and it worked really well for him for a really long time. But with those bars, if he tried to increase the angle or change the angle of the saddle from -3 to -5, it was just too much pressure on his arms. And so what we had to do is we had to really start to mess with his front end. And if you give me a minute here, or less than a minute, I'm going to pull up a company's website and I'm going to share it. I'm even going to I'll pull up a couple things for you here because I think it's just worth your time. Thanks for your patience. I will be there in 1 second. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, let me know when you can see that.
We can see it.
So what we wanted to do is to put these athletes on aero bars that allowed them just to feel really relaxed in the front end, right? Rudy von Berg is on Unico Custom, amazing bars. With Trevor Foley and Sam Long and Joe Skipper, we're on Evolve. Why? Because you can see that even though it's a full system here, it allows us to move the cups a little bit. So we can play around some. What does that mean? Well, for example, for Sam Long, we actually have the cups further back for Ironman, but a little bit further, 5 millimeters further forward for 70.3 or T100, because at the higher powers he's producing for T100, he can afford to get his elbows further forward without risking lower back pain. But for an Ironman distance, you're putting out lower power numbers. So that means you're going to have more torque on your lower back. So we need to bring the cups back to him a little bit, but we want this solid underside for the aerodynamic benefit. And I'll see if I can find one more picture here to show what this bar looks like. Yeah, I guess this is a good enough picture. But you can see how you have a lot of forearm contact, and the elbows are really cupped because there's backs on the cup there, Here you go. Here's Sam. So this is T100, really locked in, a full forearm contact the entire length of the bar, right? So that was really important. And what that allows us to do then is when he's at -5, he's really braced up on the front. Where when Jason Pohl was on the 51 speed shop setup, it wasn't enough surface area to hold him in place. So what we did is, I'm going to jump over here. Oh, I hate pop-ups. Our website does not have pop-ups, but Jason Pohl, he couldn't quite, financially pull off buying a $3,000 aero bar, right? So what we did is we got these, the company's name is Tetsuo. They're a new company. I'm a fan of theirs. Yeah, take note of this. By sticking with his 51 speed shop poles, the poles on the bike, we could put these cups on the bike and create what essentially is a full, it feels like the Evolve setup, right? It feels like some of these other, like Magnus Ditlev's one-off fully custom setup, And now this company also makes a full bar. I'm going to pull that up. This is a little bit more expensive, but for what it is, that's a pretty darn good price. It's like 1,900 US. I just put Matt McElroy on these bars. Night and day. Matt McElroy has been, he got snubbed 2 times in a row for Olympic decision. I'm not a fan of that. He should have been on the Olympic team both times. Anyways, he's moving over to long course. Look out for him at main 70.3. He'll be going head to head with Trevor Foley. He went to these bars and it was just a game changer in terms of how comfortable they are, And And so that's going to play a really key role in how comfortable the athlete is on the bike. And I'm going to do one last screen share and show you what Jason Pole's bike looks like. This was in a WhatsApp chat with Sam Long because Sam really cares about Jason Pole. And he's like, hey, Nick, did you get Jason's position figured out? Because we need him to do really well at Ironman Lake Placid. The answer is yes. Jason Pole's on our V8 saddle, -5. But look at how when he puts that Tetsuo arm cups on to the 51 speed shot bars, he has full forearm contact now all the way up. Night and day. That was a pretty awesome solution. So I'm a fan of that company, Tetsuo. It really allowed him to achieve that position. And that's going to really allow you to get your saddle angle ideally locked in.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. That Tetsuo, that's really interesting because I've had many athletes sort of reach out about that type of setup. I got a custom made from local sort of, it's called Predator Cycling.
Yeah, I know them.
Cockpit.
Yeah. Yep.
And you know Aram, you know of them, you know Predator.
I know Predator for sure. Yeah.
Okay. And but obviously it's expensive. So, but this is a great alternative.
That's a pretty good alternative. I am impressed. And that full bar is unidirectional carbon fiber. It's light and stiff. So
great. Good. Well, I think it would be worthwhile quickly to chat about maybe the early adopter program.
Oh yeah, thank you. That's right. We are going to close that next week.
Oh boy.
Just so you know, and that's not a sales pitch. That's just a fact.
Okay.
We already closed our early adopter program for our road saddle, and we're going to close our early adopter program for our V8 TT+Tri saddle next week. It allowed this early adopter program we put in place to allow us to raise a little bit of capital because we've been moving to a new manufacturer.
Okay.
And that new manufacturer is allowing us to make some slight improvements. And also, so if you buy the early adopter saddle, you get the new one from the new manufacturer. It's a little bit lighter, 7x9 rails, makes it even stronger. I should point out that our current saddle is rated to 320 pounds. Our new one will be closer to 400 pounds. So you're not breaking this. Our saddles have a lifetime warranty. So if you ever break the carbon, we're going to replace that for you. Something that we're proud of is our sustainability. Our foam, we will recover that for you. If you need to replace it within the first year, we'll do that for free. After the first year, it's $100 and we will replace. So basically you buy a saddle, you can have that saddle for life because we'll just, like our pro athletes, we replace the foam. Now those guys are doing big miles, they're doing an average of 18 hours a week year round. And so we change the foam and cover on that once a year for them,
Mm-hmm.
But we'll do that for $100. So you can just keep using the same shell. We don't want to make disposable products. And the last thing is that next year we will release a more affordable version. It'll have metal rails. And it'll have the same carbon shell, and it'll feel the same foam and cover. So it's going to feel the same to your body. So you can wait to a more affordable option, or you can do the early adopter option. And right now, if you got 20 people, a minimum of 20 people on your team, you can get, you all can go, and we've had a couple of people do this and go all in together, and you get our saddle for $250, and it's MSRP. It retails for $550. The current version is $595. When we go to our new manufacturer, we're lowering it to $550. So yeah, so that's a $300 savings on a saddle that can last the rest of your life. So, and last thing is we have a 30-day no questions asked return policy. So if you don't like the saddle, we'll fully refund your money, and shipping and all, and yeah, so it's reduce the risk.
Right. Well, I'll work on trying to see who is interested in that, and then we'll try to move quickly on that.
Thank you.
But yeah, I would love to pull that off. I'm hopeful we can. So I'll.
Well, thank you all.
Conrad,
Yep.
Conrad, can I ask a quick question here?
Yeah.
Hey Nick, my name is John. I'm here in Nashville. We are actually coming out to Boulder. Did you say you're located in Boulder?
That's right. And I saw your itinerary. It's exciting.
Yeah. So I was curious, just out of curiosity, is it possible we could just try out one of those saddles possibly? I know that sounds like that window is going to close before then, but that may be a good test just to see what it's like in person and then
Of course.
relay the information to the team.
Yep. So yeah, and how soon are you guys coming out?
So
We'll be out there
next Thursday,
20
the first day of camp.
Yeah, 25th.
Okay. Yep. I can work to I can make sure that I have a saddle here for you all to try.
Yeah, that would be great. I think we have
And I know
about
your
Thank you.
itinerary is busy, but we can definitely work something out.
cool. Yeah, well, I'll be in touch. It would be great to make that happen. Everybody try it. We'll have around, I think, 20 or so athletes there. So,
Perfect.
and I'll be there. So I'll be able to meet you in person if we can make that happen. But yeah, that's a good idea. Cool. But the early adopter
Okay,
program,
perfect.
that's
And,
going to end before that, or will it end like end of next week?
It'll in the end of next week. So
Okay.
so 2 Sundays from now.
Perfect. Got it.
And yep, I saw your itinerary and I saw that you guys are going up to Ward, peak to peak, and coming down the dirt section of Jamestown and then down Jamestown. And I'm going to encourage you just to go down to St. Vrain and come down through Lyons. It's a teeny bit longer, but there's no dirt. And the downhill steep section above Jamestown is really, really steep with 20% downhill grades. So that's the one suggestion I would suggest to you.
No, that's good. I'll relay that to Derek Owens. He's organized. He's based out of Boulder, and
Cool.
that'll be a good. You should definitely ride with us if you're free. But
let's make that a plan. So email me after this, and I am available, and I would do that with you. Okay.
cool. Sounds like a plan.
All right. Well, thank you all. I really, I'm honored that you guys allowed me all this time to chat with you. So thank you very much.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to chat with us. So thanks so much. It was really informative and enjoyable listening. And yeah, we definitely appreciate it. And if anybody has any questions on anything, or feel free to reach out to me and I can connect. But we'd love to do the early adopter
Perfect.
program. I love a saddle, and yeah. But thanks.
Okay. And I guess the last thing, on our website, on our blog, we have a blog entry that goes over a lot of these bike fit aspects, and that early adopter program is right there on our website as well. So yep.
Great. Awesome.
All right. Thank you.
Nick, and thanks everybody else for joining. See you soon.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks,
Have a good
Conrad.
day.
Bye-bye.